Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Alex's Afternoon Art Show. Today we are drawing Juggernaut and I'm going to be talking about proportions and motion and stuff like that and how you kind of sell motion in a obviously still frame. So that's going to be something which I'm going to try and talk about today. I'm also going to, as I say, talk a lot about proportion because this is a necessary element of Juggernaut because, you know, he's proportionally quite weird. So that's one of the things I'm going to be going over today. Technically, I've got like a sort of redesign sort of thing going on with Juggernaut here as well. So maybe go over that as well. But yeah, not a huge amount of stuff. Realistically speaking, this shouldn't be a super long one because I don't have any like super difficult elements of this to do. Realistically speaking, this shouldn't be too bad. This should be alright. This should be reasonably quick, reasonably enjoyable. I mean, it's not to say that the most recent ones haven't been enjoyable, they just haven't been quick. Some of them have been, but some of them they've been quite difficult. Even though they haven't been necessarily long, they've been difficult. This one shouldn't be particularly difficult, and it shouldn't be particularly long either. But yeah, so as I say, there's a lot of motion and a little bit of perspective even, a little bit of proportioning, all that stuff. But anyways, I won't intro too long. I'll just roll the intro and then, show you what I've already got. So yeah, I'll do that. Roll the intro. Okay, so this is what I've got. So as you can see here, it's pretty basic. We just got Juggernaut running towards the camera. And as I say, lots of proportion to do with this one. But again, so this is the thing, based on the nature of how I do these with doing the base sketches beforehand, it's sort of kind of a lot of the actual proportioning elements of this are already done. So I'm just going to talk over what I already did. So realistically speaking, the way in my mind at least that I tend to do more exaggerated proportions is that, say for example, I had a reference image of a man standing, just like a man standing here, and he's about this tall. What I might do is say the bottom of his waist is there. Say that's the bottom of his torso. I'd basically get my little lasso tool and I'd effectively grab it like this, and then I'd pull it off, and then expand it, change the size of it, so on and so forth. And that's kind of how I do that. And then I might take the legs, bring them down a little bit, take this arm, bring it out a little bit, take this other arm, bring it out a little bit. Then we've got a really big upper-bodied man. Which is how I did this, is where I had a couple of different reference images, hodgepodged them together, took bits of them, pulled the torso up, pulled the legs down, pulled this arm out, added another arm, grafted a different arm onto the front to kind of give it a little bit more, give him the kind of look that he's running with his arm forward like that. But it doesn't, there's an odd like kind of flatness to the way this arm is sitting, so it looks more like he's kind of hitting his chest like that, which I suppose also works. It's not a thing that Juggernaut super does, but it is a thing that I suppose could work, is that he's kind of like hitting his chest or something. And then this arm is obviously outwards and back like that, which is why this bicep here is kind of flat. But I'll kind of, again, there's certain proportional elements of this here which are a little shaky, so I'm just gonna maybe fix those a little bit. Like obviously this arm could probably do with a tiny bit of work, because you can see here it's a little flat. This hand is, I think, works quite well, but there's elements like the little wrist guard, and then obviously there's the like bands around his arms. I don't know what those are. They're like the kind of like rings that he's got around his bicep and around his forearm. I kind of don't know what those are supposed to be. But yeah, as I say, I've made some moderate changes to his design. So I shrunk his head was another thing, so that's another proportional thing that's worth noting, is whenever you're trying to make a character look really big, a way of kind of a bit of a shortcut to doing that is to just make their head smaller. That's sort of what I did here. But in a lot of the reference images that I was seeing, Juggernaut's helmet kind of varies wildly in size. Sometimes it goes from the top to all the way to the edges of the shoulders. I feel like that's a little too big, so here I decided to make it the middle of the shoulders, so he's got a bit of a small helmet. but as compared to the rest of his body, obviously. But I just figured that it might look a little bit more interesting if he's got a really small head. I think that's kind of funny looking. So I decided to kind of go with that. So he's got a pretty small head as compared to the rest of his body. Like his shoulders are individually larger than his entire head. So yeah, it's the same with like his thighs. His thighs are enormous. They're probably bigger than his entire upper body. Like that thigh is, yeah, this thigh is literally the same size as his entire upper body, but that's also because he's leaning forward, so this the lower part of his torso is a little smaller. It's kind of hunched in, so it's a little smaller than how it is. But yeah, as I say, I got slight redesign because I've merged elements here from the 90s show as well as a few elements from his design from stuff like Ultimate Alliance 3 and a few little bits and pieces like that. So he's got the bands on his arm, but he's also got his like weird knuckle thing, and also the little wrist guards that he's got, and those appear in the 90s show, but I actually couldn't find many other places where those appear. I think they appear in they might not actually appear in the 90s show. I think they only appear in the Marvel vs. Capcom games. But then I also, obviously, he's still got his striped bit on the lower part of his torso, under his pecs. But I gave him this kind of inner kind of V pattern here along his chest, which sort of angles down into the top of that. So that's just a line. There's just a few seams to make it look a little bit more interesting. Same with the kind of little seams that go along the sides of the legs. Add a little pattern along the legs, which I think works more or less. And I couldn't think of anything more interesting to do with his boots, so I still gave him the same kind of like pirate boots that he has. I don't know why that's such a common thing with a lot of Marvel characters. They have these like pirate boots. And I kind of don't know why that's such a common thing. Like even Captain America has that. The kind of I always think of them as pirate boots because they have the kind of overlapping top. That's just how I think of it. And I suppose it makes sense with Juggernaut because he's got all these bands and everything, and that looks like a big thick band, basically, at the top of that. So it kind of adds this element. The belt is something which doesn't appear in actually most of his designs. He normally just has this kind of underpants look, which I've sort of applied to a degree. And he doesn't have a belt or anything like that, but he does have the belt in the animated series. So that's where that element came from. And yeah, I mean, as you can see, his entire upper body is huge. Like his arms are longer than his legs. He's got these kind of gorilla proportions in that sense, where his upper body is significantly larger than his lower body, but obviously he's hunched in, so it doesn't look quite so much like that here. It looks more so, that his legs are bigger. But that's not the case. His arms are actually bigger. So if I were to have this arm entirely out, that's where the end of the arm would be. It would be from here to here. That's how long his arm would be. It's that long. So that is about the same. Actually, no, it's about the same size as his leg, but that's from here to here. Same size as his leg. So that's from shoulder to fist. That is pretty big. He's got enormous arms. He's got like pretty big gorilla arms, which is sort of how I envision Juggernaut as having these kind of very inhuman proportions, as being like obscenely large, because that's kind of how he is in a lot of stuff. Like in the animated series, he's enormous. He's way bigger than anyone else. He's the biggest character in the show, I think. In the Marvel vs. Capcom games, he's bigger than the Hulk. He's enormous, is how big he is in those games. Like in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, I remember this specifically because whenever I was doing the mural, I proportioned him as he is in the game, as best as I could anyways, and I made him taller than the Hulk, because that's how tall he is in the game. He stands taller than the Hulk, which is insane, and he's got these incredibly long arms which go like practically down to the floor, like a gorilla. But yeah, that's a lot of talking about the proportions. I haven't even touched on the elements such as the it was motion. I don't remember what the third one was. I don't remember what the third thing was. Motion is largely going to be sold by, I think in the details what I'm going to do is I'm going to have like a few bits of like debris flying off a little bit around in a few directions, just like maybe around the foot here. There's kind of some debris flying off so that it looks like he's stomping really hard while he's running, and then just have it like kind of flying off a little bit, like little tiny bits of rock and stuff like that flying off in the background. And I'm gonna probably do the speed lines thing, which, I mean, you've probably, if you've seen one of these videos before, you might have seen me do that on like Spider Carnage. I've done the speed lines thing before a few times. I think a few times, I'm not sure actually now that I think about it, but it does a great deal actually to sell the motion of a scene. It's never to be underestimated, the power of speed lines. So generally all I do for that is, it's pretty simple. I just do a straight line, tilt, do a straight line, tilt, do a straight line, tilt, and that's just it. That's all there is to it. I just keep tilting the canvas until I get straight lines going all the way around him, and they all kind of point into the same focal point, which will probably be around here. It's probably the focal point, more or less. Yeah, I suppose redesigning was the other thing, wasn't it? I don't really remember now, actually. But yeah, the big ones were the proportions and the motion. That's kind of the big stuff. But yeah, I've been talking now for quite a bit. So I think I will probably begin my details, and then I'll be back to show off the colours. I'll start the colours. So I'll do stuff like, I'll be doing the details, and I'll do all those little bits of debris and stuff like that. I'll do that in this section. The speed lines will probably be the very end. I don't think I'll do that until the very, very end. So yeah, I don't need to do any of that just yet, but I have already walked you through it. What else is there that needs to be covered? There was that third topic. I might remember it at some point. Who knows? If I remember it at some point, I'll probably talk about it. But since I've completely forgotten about it, chances are it wasn't that important, anyways. So, yeah. Anyways, as I said, the focus of this is the proportions and the motion. But yeah. Anyways, I'll begin. Well, I think that's our details done. more or less. So I did a few little things which I think are interesting. So on all of the kind of metallic bits, such as the kind of wrist guards and the helmet and all this stuff, I added these like little scratches, and I put dents in the helmet. That's what these little circular bits are. They're little dents in the helmet, which I think it would make sense given how he uses his helmet for basically everything. It would make sense that there's some wear and tear and some dents and scratches and stuff, but obviously it's not an easily destructible material, but yet you should still be getting little things like little notches and dents in it. That would make a degree of sense anyways. And that's the same with all the rest of the metal. It's kind of scratched and beaten up, and I decided to put these little metal guards on the front of his boots. I should maybe apply a tiny little crease or something like that, just to kind of give it a little bit more going on here. Something a little bit more interesting going on with that, so that it just isn't like completely nothing that's going on with these kind of boots here. Realistically, they're not a very important part, but I mean, at the end of the day, shouldn't be totally without detail. So let's do something like that, something basic. You know, this was actually something which I meant to do earlier on. Let's just apply these little notches on the belt like that, just to kind of give it a little bit of detailing going on there, because otherwise that belt looks a little bare to me. But yeah, I think that's fine. And yeah, as you probably saw there, I was kind of tinkering around a lot with these little bits of debris and rocks and stuff like that. So I had some kind of showering over his shoulders, and then obviously there's the ones blasting out from the ground as he's running. But I didn't want to go too crazy with it. I might apply like a light kind of bit of dust around behind that with a smoke brush later on during the painted shading. I might do something like that just to kind of maybe make this look a little bit more interesting, just apply these little bits of dust around here. But obviously I don't want it to be too thick. I'll just have it be like a light, very light dust that kind of floats along the ground here and over his shoulders a little bit, just so that it gives the kind of little bits of debris something they're kind of hanging onto, like the dust. Like that would maybe do something for us. It'd maybe make it a little bit more interesting looking, because yeah, as it stands, they're a little bit it's just kind of random bits of stuff kind of floating around the place, which again, if we're just going by the if I'm just going to be doing the speed lines, feels like it's not going to be super necessary, so I'll maybe do the little bits of dust to kind of to maybe just give those little pebbles something. Yeah, as it relates to the background, I'm probably going to, I'm either thinking of something very yellow for the background or very red. Regardless, we're probably going to be going for a warmer color palette anyways, because the Juggernaut's colors are all brown. They're all kind of browns, so that is, yeah, going to be primarily where a lot of that is coming from. So yeah, it would be a case of where a lot of this would be brown. So we're looking at a warmer color palette anyways in the end. So I tend to stick to pretty consistent color palettes all throughout. So for example, I'm not going to give him a cold color palette because that'll look a little strange when combining with the warm colors of his costume. So I'll probably roll with something like that for the background as well, something maybe red or yellow. I feel like the dust will probably be kind of a slightly yellowed grey, so maybe I might go with yellow for the background, and then maybe red for the speed lines. Maybe make the speed lines like a kind of a reddy orange colour, something like that. So that, yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe a warm yellow. I'll probably go for a warm yellow or something like that. We'll think about this anyways as I'm going. But yeah, anyways, so that's all that stuff done. So now it is time to do the colors, and this shouldn't be a particularly long sequence because, you know, there's only like 3 colors going on here, so realistically speaking, this shouldn't be too difficult. But yeah, anyways, I will carry on. Okay, so that's our colors done, and a little bit more. I did the dust here as well. I'm kind of unsure whether or not I'm going to maybe turn down the opacity on it or do something like that too. I might fiddle with it a little bit, but as it stands, I think it's mostly okay. I'm probably going to stick with it as is for the time being. But there are a few things which I also did. Yeah, I also did the background bit. I made a little bit of a glow behind him. It's kind of hidden by the dust, but I just, yeah, put that in mostly as a reference for when I'm doing the speed lines later. That'll help me out a lot. So now it is time for the painted shading. But yeah, I also decided to do a two-tone on the brown because I thought it would look a little better, and I do think it looks a little better. The red kind of clashes a little bit, I think, but I think it's okay. I think the painted shading, just shading in general, will kind of do a little bit to help us out with that. It'll kind of blend things in a little bit more. I did also give him his very pronounced ginger eyebrows as a feature that I think is important. Is that, yeah, Juggernaut is ginger, so I decided to give him his ginger eyebrows. But yeah, so now I think it's time for the painted shading. So I will do this, and then I'll be back to the detailed shading, which will be us basically. And yeah, this is only 2.5 hours only now, so yeah, I mean, I'm making good time on this one. I didn't expect this to be as quick as it has been, but you know, I'm not going to argue. Anyways, I'll get on with this, and then I'll be back. Okay, so that is our painted shading done. That took like not even 20 minutes. That was a pretty quick section. Because very little of this actually requires painted shading. I don't need to shade his eyebrows. Well, I don't need to painted shade them. I'll shade them in this section, but otherwise I don't need to paint his eyebrows. I don't need to paint like the rocks because there's not enough of them to really warrant that. So I'll just do that in this section with the detailed shading, so I can just kind of scribble along them and then get the vague idea of shading. But yeah, realistically speaking, I don't actually even think there's even like 40 minutes left of this at this rate. This might be the shortest art video I've done in probably years. Since the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 mural, this might be the quickest art video I have done in a long time. Which again, I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to complain. I see no issue with that. So if that is the case, then yeah, I suppose there's a few things which I maybe didn't mention earlier on, which is perhaps, because you probably saw, I mean you definitely saw if you were watching at least, while I was doing this, you would have seen the kind of intense musculature that I've given him, which to me makes a lot of sense because this is Juggernaut we're talking about. He's kind of almost grotesquely muscular, obscenely muscular, to the level where he is effectively like, it looks like the muscle is almost bursting out of his skin at certain places, like around his chest. It's a case where it's all contracting along the chest, and it's forming these like really harsh stretch lines of the skin effectively being pushed out because of how much muscle there is in there. And same deal along the arms. You can see it along this forearm. No one's forearm looks like that. No one's inner arm looks like this. It's just so intensely muscular that it's not even smooth anymore. It's just strained, thick lines. And I think that makes for an interesting look. And it's the same thing along the legs, but legs typically don't get those kind of lines. Like even like really muscular legs don't even get those kinds of like stretch marks. Plus, he is significantly more upper body than lower body, is how I intended on drawing it. But obviously, more of his lower body's on show. But yeah, so there was that element of where, and I think the painted shading's done a good job of kind of highlighting that, especially along the legs, the kind of enormous size of him. But yeah, But yeah, I'll be doing the speed lines during this section as well. I'll do the detailed shading, the light line, and then I'll do the speed lines as well. Because then that'll basically just be all of it done. Still don't really remember what that third topic I mentioned at the beginning was. I'll remember it in the edit, and I'll maybe leave a note at some point during this where I may have brought it up, but that's provided I remember it. But I mean, yeah, I suppose I'll remember it in the edit, because I did say it at the start of the video, so yeah. Anyways, I don't see a point in kind of lingering too much longer. I will just begin doing this detailed shading, and then I'll be back to do the gradient maps and wrap up. So yeah, anyways. Alright, well, that is the detailed shading, the light line, and the speed line's done. Speed line's the time-consuming part. As you can see, it sort of kind of lost its way around this part, and it started getting kind of freaky. But these things don't need to be perfect, and I'll be damned if anyone considers this perfect, especially these speed lines around here. These ones are proper, these ones are right, but it's just these ones around here are kind of losing their way a little bit. I forget the exact increment. I forgot the exact increments that I was rotating at around this point. So I started trying to figure out what I was doing, and then it just started to get a bit crazy, and things started to get messy around here. But I'm not doing all that again. So yeah, I think we're gonna roll with this as is. It'll work. It's fine enough. It'll work for our purposes. We don't need it to be perfect. It gets difficult whenever you do the full rotation of these things. For example, on the Spider Carnage one, I only had to do speed lines from about here to here. I didn't have to cover the whole screen because he was covering that amount of screen, and he covered the bottom part as well. So I didn't have to do the whole rotation. Therefore, you didn't get this problem forming, where at some point it's difficult to remember the exact increments you're going at, which is what happened to me here. So, you know, that's what happened. But anyways, I will do the gradient maps. Let us see. Right, let me have a look. I'm going to want to keep this warm. I'll probably make this one red. Lowest part red. Make the brightest part probably yellow, warm yellow, right there. And then the mid-tone should be an orangey color, like here. It's a little not quite right. Maybe a little redder. Let's see how this looks. I mean, it's not considerably different from what we've already got. It's just significantly more intense. I suppose what's good is that the dust sort of disappears a little bit into it, so we're probably going to want to keep this at maybe like 65. 65 will work for me, I think. Again, we want it to remain intense. We want it to kind of assault you a little bit. Not too much, obviously, but we want it to be we want it to be pretty intense, because this is obviously the point of this, is that this should be an intense intense looking thing. You know, Juggernaut, he's coming right at you. So that's what we want. We want it to be intense. We want it to be sharp, and we want it to kind of hit you right in the eyes. But yeah, anyways, whatever rambling I was doing there, I need to grab my texture, and then that will basically be it. Which, yeah, that would mean this is like the shortest one I've done in God knows how long, because I mean, what are we at now? We're at 3.5 hours. That's not actually as short as last time. I think no, I think we're shorter than Bishop, obviously, but I think still longer than the one before that. 'Cause the one before that was quick enough, I think. I don't remember exactly now. Yeah, right, we're not going to want this to be too intense because it will be very visible on the background. Let's leave it at 25%. At 25%, that should work for us. Let me have a zoom in and have a look. It's subtle enough that it's not like distracting, but it adds a nice bit of texture. Obviously, I mean, it is a texture at the end of the day. But yeah, it adds a nice little version of things, which I like. But yeah, so that is us done. That's a remarkably easy one. I honestly wasn't expecting this one to be quite as easy as it was. I expected the kind of sheer scale of things going on here, or the scale of Juggernaut to it cost more time, but it actually was pretty easy, all things considered. Yeah, I suppose I am kind of surprised at just how quick this was. I wasn't expecting it to be long by any measure of the imagination, but yeah, I just wasn't expecting it to be this quick, I suppose. It was fun. It was a fun one. That's the nice part, at least. It didn't drain my life force. It didn't make me want to never do another art video, which is good whenever that happens, I suppose. Not to say that the other ones normally do that. They don't normally. But there have been ones in the past where I've thought to myself, this was so arduous, I never want to do it again. Also known as kind of the just process of finishing anything, really. But anyways, that I suppose is us. Yeah, this was a fun one. I still feel like this this arm over here is a little flat. It could maybe stand to be a little bit more kind of pronounced as coming out. It feels like it's too close in, so it looks like he's, again, like I said originally, is beating his chest. Which again, I suppose, isn't too out of character. It's a little unusual for him, but it's not, again, completely out of character. But yeah, this is a fun one. As I said at the beginning, I think the size of his helmet could maybe... I think his helmet could stand to be a lot bigger, but obviously, as I said at the beginning, I made his head smaller to help with the proportions. And I think it works. I think it works, even though, again, as I say, he does have a bit of a small helmet. It doesn't need to be enormous. Usually, again, it would probably come out to about here, and that's how big it would be on a lot of other ones. And you wouldn't even be able to see, like, his collarbone, like you can here. The helmet would just kind of cover most of the chest. I do think having the dents actually adds a nice amount of kind of weathering to the helmet. I think, generally speaking, this isn't necessarily a rule of thumb or anything like that. It's not even a rule of any variety. But it's just a thing which a lot of the time is true. And it's that any sort of armor or anything like that tends to look better whenever it's been weathered a little bit, whenever it looks like it's been used. This is true for a lot of things. Not always, obviously. It depends on what you want. If you want it to look pristine, if you want it to be very kind of, I suppose, if you're looking at like high fantasy armor, you might not want it to be weathered because that kind of clashes a little bit with the typical tone of high fantasy, which is to say that it's very bright and peppy. So whenever you have high fantasy that is that would have like heavily weathered armor, you would think maybe that's like a villain or something like that, or a character who's seen far more battle than they should have, something along those lines. So here, whenever you're having, again, Juggernaut, who is a villain, it makes a degree of sense, even though it's obviously isn't fantasy or anything like that. It's just an example. It kind of works a little bit for the armor to be a little weathered, for the helmet to have some dents and stuff like that in it. But of course, I mean, it's supposed to be indestructible, as my memory of it is, that all the armor is like basically indestructible. So again, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense that it's damaged in any way, but whatever. It doesn't matter. So, with that said, I think that is us. I think I'm good to wrap up. So I'll say my goodbyes. I'll say my outro, and I'll leave you. And it's worth noting that it's not dark yet. It's getting there, but it's not dark yet. And I finished an art video, so that's good. Anyways, if you like the video, do whatever it is that you'd normally do, whether that be liking or not. I sort of kind of mumbled that one all the way out there, but I'll try again. If you like the video, do whatever it is that you'd normally do, whether that be liking it or not. I would, of course, prefer if you liked it, but I can't make you do that. So I'm not going to try. And yeah, if you choose to subscribe, it's the same deal. If you would like to do it, that's a great thing. For me, at least. And you, if you really enjoy these. So, I mean, you know, you could do it. I don't need to tell you where the subscribe button is. You presumably watched a YouTube video before. You know it's beneath the video. And yeah, if you have any suggestions for things you'd like to see me draw in the future, you could leave that in the comments section. Of course, I would prefer if you did so politely. As a matter of fact, I would only like you to do it politely, because if you don't do it politely, I'm not going to do it, and I'm also not going to respond to the comment, and I'm also likely going to remove the comment. So, note that. Anyways, yeah, if you choose to watch the next video, I'll see you next time. So with all that said, I'll say goodbye and I'll leave you. So, bye-bye.